Okay, so today we're diving into something incredibly tough. The harrowing journey that migrants face when their path to a new life takes them straight into Libya. For so many, it's a journey that turns into an absolute nightmare.
For people all across Africa, the dream is often the same one. Find safety, find a job, just build a better life somewhere in Europe. They're leaving home because they have to, running from brutal conflicts or just crushing poverty. And that journey, that path of hope, for so many, leads right to the shores of the Mediterranean.
But before they can even get a glimpse of the sea, they have to pass through Libya. And ever since 2011, since the fall of the Gaddafi regime, the country has really become this black hole of lawlessness. It's a trap where that dream of Europe dies and a living nightmare begins.
The situation got so systematically awful that the United Nations Security Council used the gravest language it has to describe what was happening: potential crimes against humanity. So we're not just talking about a crisis here. This is a full-blown catastrophe of human dignity.
So how did this hidden horror finally get dragged out into the light for the whole world to see? Well, it all come down to one single, absolutely chilling piece of evidence. Back in 2017, a video surfaced online that the world just could not ignore. It actually showed human beings, men from sub-Saharan Africa, being paraded in front of a crowd and sold off like they were property. It was a modern-day slave auction, and it was all captured on a cell phone.
And the price for human life? According to that footage, as little as $400. Let that sink in for a second. $400. That one video, that one number, just crystallized the absolute depravity that migrants were facing. But here's the thing. As shocking as that auction was, it wasn't some isolated, one-off event. Not even close. It was actually a symptom of a much larger, much more organized system of abuse. So let's break down the anatomy of this crisis. When you look at the reports from the UN and human rights groups, they've documented this consistent, terrifying pattern of abuse. Migrants get caught in this cycle of detention, of forced labor, sexual violence, and just constant extortion. It is a system built entirely on—
So who is running this whole horrific business? Well, it's a really complex web. You've got criminal smuggling rings, you've got powerful local militias and clan warlords who basically control territory. But what's really disturbing is the evidence that points to collusion. Reports show links between these criminal groups and actors inside state institutions, even parts of the security services.
And all of this leads to a pretty obvious question, right? Knowing the horrific risks, why on earth do people still try to make this journey? Well, the answer really lies in the desperation they are running from.
It all comes down to what's behind them. For so many, the dangers they're leaving behind feel so much greater than the dangers that might lie ahead. There are a few core drivers pushing people to do this. The biggest one is simple economics. A desperate lack of jobs drives about half of all migrants to make this journey. Another 30% are fleeing active conflict zones and instability. Then you add in things like climate shocks and the fact that there are almost no legal ways to migrate, and you've got a perfect storm of desperation.
And all this creates this really tragic funnel. First, people are forced to flee their homes. Second, they find that all the legal doors to safety and work in Europe are slammed shut. So that pushes them to step 3. They have no choice but to rely on criminal smugglers who promise them safe passage. And that leads them directly to the final step: entrapment in Libya's brutal and very profitable cycle of abuse.
So, we have these horrific crimes, a clear system of exploitation. But where's the law in all of this? Where's the justice? The hard truth is, for migrants in Libya, there is none. And what's wild is that, on paper, the rules are crystal clear. International law explicitly prohibits human trafficking, slavery, and torture. It requires countries to protect people fleeing persecution and to hold the bad guys accountable. The legal framework is there.
But the gap between those laws and what's actually happening on the ground is just staggering. Where the law says to prevent trafficking, Libya has a booming business in it. Where the law forbids torture, it's used as a routine tool for extortion. And where the law demands prosecution, well, impunity is just the norm. And crucially, Libya isn't even a signatory to the main international treaty on protecting refugees.
And this is where the story gets even more complicated. A lot of human rights organizations argue that European policies, which involve funding and training Libyan forces to stop migrant boats and send them back to Libya, are actually making the problem worse. They call it outsourcing border control, which effectively traps people in the very same cycle of abuse they were trying to escape in the first place.
So given this total systemic failure, what could possibly be done?
Well, international bodies and NGOs have laid out a pretty clear, if difficult, path forward.
The road ahead really requires 4 key actions. First and foremost, accountability. That means actually investigating and prosecuting the traffickers and any officials who are helping them. Second, creating safe and legal pathways for migration so people don't have to turn to smugglers. Third, providing real support for the victims, trauma care, safe options to return home. And finally, you have to dismantle the whole business by going after their money.
Ultimately, this whole crisis forces us to confront a really profound and uncomfortable question. In this global effort to manage migration and secure borders, a system has been allowed to flourish where human beings are literally bought and sold, tortured for profit, and stripped out all their dignity. And that leaves us with one final thought. Is any security policy worth that price?